Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. It's Friday, June 19th, and we're excited to be with you again today. Thanks for being with us. We've got a fun show today, some cool stories that some of which came out of earlier parts on the show. We're going to do some FDA education. We're going to switch the order up a little bit. I'll just tell you really briefly, the big news is that FDA has revoked the Chembio antibody assay. It was one of the earliest antibody assays out there, and it's just not performing like it was originally expected to. And so we expect to see that this may be the start of more of that happening as the real data starts to come out. We'll be talking about that later today. I suppose the other big point of news is that I actually got a haircut this week for the first time in 3 months, so pretty excited about that. But without further ado, we're going to go to our guests. Our first guest today is David Sarment with Xoran Technologies. David, I've enabled your video and you can just unmute yourself. Welcome to the show, David.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, it's great to have you. Xoran's been a long time company in the ecosystem, creating scanners, and I just thought it was such a cool story though, because you were with us on the show a few weeks ago when former Governor Snyder and Dr. Glenn Green were on the show talking about the VentMI ventilator splitter, and then I got the news that you guys actually made contact, and now you guys have a distribution agreement going as a set of multiple companies. So I thought it'd be really fun to have you on and tell us a little bit. I guess first of all, many people may not know what Xoran does, so I'd love for you to just start with a quick intro to what Xoran is and what it does.
Yes, thank you for having me. Xoran Technologies is right here in Ann Arbor. We made computed tomography CT scanners of a special type. We actually started at the university in the early 2000s as a research project. And our devices are in-office or intraoperative CT scans, mostly for head and neck applications at the moment, although we have some other tools. And we do this right here in Ann Arbor. We're south of the airport on State Road.
That's really cool. And you guys have a nice facility down there, and your distribution is quite large. I mean, you guys are taking relatively large machines, and I believe it's worldwide, right?
Yes, so we have hundreds and hundreds of devices here in the US where we have most of our market, but we also have a facility and installations of CT scans all throughout Europe and other countries. Australia would be one example, and we actually are entering China now. And so we have distributors throughout the world. Here in the US, we do everything directly. So when I heard on your show about VentMI, I realized it was a fantastic idea. It made a lot of sense. VentMI is, like you described, an idea from the university clinicians, and it's a splitter for ventilators, not our business at all. But the idea is that the splitters out there are just that, and what that means is on a ventilator, 2 patients or more have to be exactly the same, meaning they have to have the same requirements and needs for air pressures. Well, this particular splitter allows for one patient to be different than the other one. So I thought that was a pretty cool idea. And they have everything in place, and they've done a beautiful job in weeks. It was just amazing that they managed to have the idea, engineer the device, find a manufacturer, fight it with the FDA on the EUA. And the only thing that was missing for them was a distributor. And since we have CT scans in hospitals and in ICUs, in neuro ICUs in particular, I thought, we were set up for it. So I reached out to them, and we're simply the distributors of that device, although it's not really our core business.
That's interesting. So you felt like your distribution model got to places that they needed to get to. So it wasn't so much that the physical part was, the same size or anything like that, but that you had avenues to the places that they were trying to get to. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, exactly. We're just basically helping with what we have. I think in these times, that's that's what you can do. So we thought, okay, we have the salespeople, we have folks all around the country, we have technical folks in hospitals, and why not try to see if we can help out and have those splitters placed in hospitals. And that's true in the US, but we actually had, as a result of sort of talking about it, we've had some requests from all over the world, actually.
That's really cool. And of course, this is a great local story that's required a lot of different groups' involvement. Of course, you had the former governor part of the effort. You had the University of Michigan working on it. You've got, Steve, am I still live? We just
Should be still live.
Okay, I just lost all my screens, so I can't see anything. So I hope you're all still hearing me. The university, and then we had, I believe, another company called Make Medical that's affiliated with U of M a little bit, that did some of the manufacturing aspects. Can you tell us just a little bit, David, about how after the show, when you made contact and you reached out, and again, don't tell us anything that's confidential or private information, obviously, but I think a lot of people would be interested, because whether it's in the emergency times or whether it's in the regular startup times, we all are talking about not only what does it take to develop a product, but what does it take to get it out there. And a lot of people forget about the distribution aspect. They forget about the logistical aspect and other stuff like that. What does it look like to put together a team? Okay, I've got a product, I've got clearance from FDA. What does it look like here in this kind of a case to put together a team to say, okay, now we're going to take that next step? What kinds of questions were you guys having to talk through, at least at a high level, to say, yeah, this is the right fit, we're the right set of teams to work together on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a bigger question. Of course, Make Medical and the clinicians understood that, actually. They knew that they had come up with a bright idea very quickly, but they also understood that they were not set up for basically sales. And that's a huge part of the success, of course. It is one thing to have a good idea. It's another one to bring it to the right place at the right time. And in our case, for our experience, we've now doing this for about 18 years. We've realized that the idea is half of the battle, so to speak.
Yeah, well, it's a really neat story, and it's really cool how you guys got together. We're glad that could happen through this avenue, but more than that, what U of M's done and Make Medical and you guys in putting that together, and obviously the need is now probably a down the road one, but it's really cool to see how that came together. And I think we'll be learning lessons from these kinds of things for a long time.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think we first of all, a platform like yours is something that came out initially as necessity, but it for me, who just sort of jumped in, and because we've known each other for a long while now, I was just curious, and curiosity was just enough to figure out that there was some local connections and smart ideas that we could partner with and help with, and I thought that was interesting. What the other lesson so far is that we, in this particular circumstance, we realized that we were not prepared. None of us were, of course. And now that sort of the wave of COVID is starting to be behind us, we actually, it's not that easy to place those splitters. We're not really selling them as a business. We're just trying to help. But it's remarkable, and I think that's something we need to all think about, that we are actually finding that people have moved on. And now I think in sometime soon, we'll probably start to hear preparation for the next potential set of issues. At the moment, I think everybody is recovering, wanting to get out of the house and breathe a little.
Breathe a little bit outside. That's true. Although I think it's good that you bring that point up, David, because this is something we've talked about probably every other show on here. I think my favorite example at this point, it's not favorite, it's not a good thing, is in 2009 when the government identified a shortage of ventilators and put a bunch of money in, and some commercial interest basically, that wasn't really a priority. It wasn't really something that they cared about. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's the kind of thing where it may not be this, it may be something else later, but this would now be the second time we've gone and said it sure would be nice if we could have more ventilators or ventilatory support devices around. So I applaud your being willing to kind of press forward with that, even if the immediate crisis is over, because it's something always nice to have something in the back of the toolkit to say, yeah, you remember what we did back in 2020? Well, it's still there. So we appreciate
Right. So
your.
we intend to continue to help and attempt to distribute the splitter for a long while, not just for, not until the end of the summer.
That's wonderful. Well, I appreciate you being on the show today. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about Xoran, or what you guys are up to, or any cool things you have happening on your main business and product line?
Well, we have a lot. This time of uncertainty gave us a chance to spend more time doing research, actually, and you know that we're very much focusing on research grants. So we managed to refocus some of our effort while the sales were not as significant as they usually are, to develop some new options, always centered around what we know how to do, which are those small CT scans. For some discussion for some other time.
Well, we appreciate what you guys are doing, and hope everyone can learn about Xoran and the contributions that you guys have made there. And really thank you for being on today with us, David.
It's always a pleasure.
Thanks again. Great. Well, next up, speaking of making connections and interesting things that have come out, I think we all had a wake-up call when it came to imported products. There's many great people all over the world doing great things. Sometimes it's nice to know that you have what you need in your own backyard. And I was privileged to be introduced to our next guest, who is Scott Phillips. Scott is with the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center, an organization I didn't really understand existed before this whole thing happened, and then we got put in touch. Scott is originally the founder of a company called the Searchlight that does market research, I believe, Scott, and been a great community pillar for a long time. And he's now with the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center, and companies that have been affected by imports, that have seen their business affected by imports. He's got programs that we never knew about. So Scott, we would just love to have you tell us a little bit about what do you guys call it's GTAAF. Do you guys have a nickname for that?
Yeah, it's a mouthful. We're the Great Lakes TAC.
Okay, Great Lakes TAC.
Yeah, and
we'd love to hear more about it.
Good. Can you see my screen okay, Gene?
We can, yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, great. I really appreciate that we got introduced to Gene, and this is a federal assistance program that's not very widely known. And so any opportunity we get to be part of a webinar or a conference just to get the word out, because we think there's a lot of companies we can help that may not know about the program. So we are the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center. We manage a federal matching funds program. We're housed at the University of Michigan under the Economic Growth Institute. There's many programs managed in that group, and we're one of them. And this is the only federal assistance program which is specifically designed to help manufacturers whose business has been impacted by import competition. And we're one of 11 centers around the country that manage what's known as the Trade Adjustment and Assistance for Firms program. It's about a $40 million program a year. It's well funded. We sometimes struggle to find companies who can take advantage of it. We work with the U.S. Economic Development Administration, and what we do is we find clients who can qualify for the program, and then we help them write a petition to get them in the program. And once they're in the program, they're eligible for up to $75,000 in matching funds. And those matching funds is quite flexible, the use of them. They can be used to bring in any kind of third-party solution provider or consultant to help improve the business, make them more competitive. And I'll give an example or two here in a minute. There's no fee to apply to this program. There's minimal fees if you are accepted into the program. But ultimately, once you're certified, accepted, and have a spending plan, you have basically 5 years to spend $150,000, including the $75,000 match from the federal government, on one or multiple projects to improve your business. The company also gets a confidential look by a set of outside eyes. Once they're in the programs, the project manager from our office will do a site visit and meet with the leadership team to determine strengths and weaknesses and where we can help them the most. Once the company is in the phase of spending on projects, the types of companies that are brought in to help a client can be companies that they already know and are comfortable with. But we ourselves, the Great Lakes Tax, also has a database of hundreds of companies in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana that can provide all sorts of services that we can recommend.
And Scott, is that matching funds, that is matching, the company puts up half of it and then the federal government puts up half of it?
That's correct. It's dollar for dollar. Yep.
Cool. So this is not like just free money. Oh, I wasn't thinking about doing this, but here you go. It's really, you got to be committed to this idea that you're gonna work on this gap that's there, and basically then it's, you pay 50 cents and you get $1.
That's right. People often want to call this program a grant, but technically it's not a grant. It is a matching funds program, and you're right. The clients that go so far as to apply and get into the program are pretty motivated because they're going to have skin in the game.
Yeah, cool.
And so there's three criteria that a company has to meet to be eligible for the program. They have to be directly impacted by imports. I'll come back to that. Their sales have to be down 5% over a recent trend. And the period of time that we look at is quite flexible. It could be just the prior year versus the year before that. It could be a little bit of a longer look back to find a decline. And it can be as short as just the last 6 months. So for example, we have a lot of manufacturing companies who are in the automotive or aerospace supply chain. And because of COVID and furloughs, and shutdowns, they're able to qualify just on the last 6 months, whereas normally they would not be able to qualify. So the pandemic has actually made the program more accessible to some companies. Mm. The third criteria is that the average monthly employment has to be down 5%. So the same period of time that the sales is down 5%, average monthly employment has to be down 5% as well. And then back to the first criteria, the way the EDA looks at import impact is very, very prescriptive. We have to identify the client's customers, their direct invoice customers, and we have to speak with at least a couple of them who can verify on the phone that they've shifted some purchases from the client to a foreign competitor. And then we just document that in the petition. So those are the three criteria, and a company has to meet all three criteria. There's three phases to the program. I focus on the first phase, finding companies that I can qualify. That process can take a couple months for me to work with the client and get all the documentation, file the petition, and then there's a legal review done in Washington by the EDA. The second phase is the planning phase, to plan how to spend the $150,000. And that involves a site visit and a plan that's submitted to the EDA as well. And then the third phase is 5 years long, once we're approved to spend. And anytime that the client wants to kick off a project, our project manager at GLTAC works with them to write a 3-way contract so that whatever the service is, when that work is done and completed, the client pays half the invoice amount and then we pay the other half of the invoice amount. In terms of use of funds, Gene had asked me to give some examples of the way that companies use the program. So I'll make some general comments and then I'll talk about a Michigan company that I think this audience might find interesting. So, you know, common uses of funds are to help improve top line growth, marketing and sales, you know, websites, market research, business development, industrial or systems engineering, certifications, lean training. Some people need help with management training, succession planning if they're a small family fund, so software implementation. The use of funds is very flexible. Anything that a third party can provide, we can pay for half of. We're kind of like a half off coupon book, really.
I do like that though, because you're basically saying you've really got to be into this company. You've got to really believe that this is the next step for you to come back against the challenge of the imports. And so it's very much supportive of those, the goals are aligned there.
Yeah, and Gene, that's a good lead. And so I have a current client right now that's in the program. They're based in Sterling Heights, Michigan. I won't mention the name just for confidentiality in the program, but they're an optics and camera company, and they've been around for 20 years. And most of that time, their markets were bio research, selling microscope cameras and software for bright field and fluorescent microscopy to major research universities. And then their second line of business was building OEM optics, lightings, and CMOS cameras for other brands. And so they were they were a small company that were competing against the likes of Canon and Zeiss in very big foreign competition. And due to some distribution changes that happened a while ago, they really lost a lot of business, most of it to the big foreign competitors. So we qualified them for the program, and they had done some research and identified digital pathology as a very good opportunity for their particular competencies and their knowledge. So what they did is they focused on pathology imaging, documentation and gross microscopy images, real-time telepathology, consulting, and tumor board presentations. And the way they used their $150,000 was really, I thought, quite ingenious. First, they had to really get a much more disciplined product development process in place. And we helped put them in touch with a consultant to help them develop that process. They had to rethink their sales channels and rep firms to really approach the digital pathology market. And it was worldwide. And then they needed some software updates. Their software was a little out of date. So they really stretched their $150,000 a long ways in those three buckets. And they spent through the program fairly quickly. What I would say to anybody listening, if you're somebody that maybe you're not a manufacturer yourself, but you're in touch with other manufacturers or know some, what we ask people to look for is, if you're talking to a company that's got flat or declining sales, flat or declining employment, and maybe they're losing bids and losing them to foreign competitors, and if they have any at all indication of increased competition from foreign competitors, then that's a situation that's worth a phone call to us. And me and my counterparts at the office, 5 or 10 minutes on the phone with the president or controller, or we can usually determine if it's worth the company's time to move forward and pursue the matching grant, the matching funds. And I'll just kind of wrap up, and answer any questions. But my contact information is on the screen. Like I said, we're at the University of Michigan. You can go to our website and get information off of our website and our contact information. But I would really appreciate anyone who can put me in touch with somebody that's at least worth a phone call to see if we can. We don't want to leave money on the table if we can help companies.
Well, that's great, Scott. I think it's a really neat service. And of course, it goes outside of just the MedTech world, but I know that we bump into so many manufacturers, some of whom are big medical device manufacturers, some of whom are smaller ones, and some of whom can help but are trying to make that transition. And so I think insofar as this community that convenes here is fully embraces the Michigan's manufacturing world, I think what you've got there is really, really cool, and people can access it and leverage it, again, with those criteria there. But I thought it'd be really fun to have you come on and tell our audience about it. So I appreciate that. I will pause really briefly for any questions. If anyone has a question for Scott, this would be a great time to ask it if you have any questions about the program. Otherwise, the website there, you can raise your hand in Zoom if you have a question. The website, gltaac.org, gltaac.org. Not seeing any questions. Scott, I'm really thankful that you're willing to come on today and talk to us, and we will certainly refer people to you. I'm glad that we could connect and get to know a little bit more about your group, and wish you guys continued success in this post-COVID world.
Great.
Gene,
Thanks, Gene. Appreciate it.
I think I saw.
Oh,
pop
we do
up.
have a question. Sorry, hold the phone, please. Aaron said there was a question. Do we have a question? Where'd you see that, Aaron?
In the chat.
Oh, okay. It looks like not in this case. That not relating to Scott's. But thanks for flagging that. Great. Okay. Well, thank you again, Scott. Really appreciate it, sir.
Okay.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to do a couple of housekeeping bits before we get on to the FDA EUA news of the day. One of those is that we are going to be here next week. I want to let you all know July 3rd is the observed Independence Day holiday, and that's Friday. So we will not be having a show on July 3rd. That is the one day we will not have a show. But we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Also, I wanted to mention that a frequent contributor of ours, Nikki Kennedy, with Arbor Hive, we've been talking together, and we're planning to start bringing you we don't have a name for it yet, but it's going to have to do with talking to docs about real life challenges that they're facing. People have talked a lot about reverse pitches at conferences and stuff like that, and we're starting to get into that, and Nikki is going to bring some of that our way, along with her Arbor Hive effort. And so we're looking forward to having her on an upcoming show going forward to talk about what docs are seeing, what kinds of problems they're having. It's often in the product development world, we often have this issue where people who are trying to create solutions think, oh, I've got this great technology and I want to turn it into a product, but they haven't necessarily talked to the customer. And there are many groups out there doing a good job of trying to connect product companies to customers, to talk to them, to say, is this really what you need? Should we be doing something different? And we're going to go all the way back to the source, and Nikki's going to help us talk and learn from doctors about what they're up against. So look forward to that on some upcoming shows as well. I want to take you over now to this Chembio emergency use authorization, and I'm going to go to a screen share here. And what you're going to see here is the FDA's page that they have revoked the emergency use authorization for the Chembio antibody test. You remember we had Vanessa Kelchner on from Acadium, we had Brandon McNaughton from Acadium talking to us about testing. Then we had Dr. Ing Pottinger, former CDC virologist, now with Columbia University, telling us all about sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive values, negative predictive values. So we started to learn a little bit about this. There's been a lot in the news recently about sometimes people have lumped those test results together. Well, an antibody test is supposed to tell whether you've had the virus, and a lot of the other testing is telling you whether you currently have the virus. And so the focus here is these antibody tests that in theory should tell us, have you been exposed to the virus? Have you had it? And I suppose it's somewhat disheartening news, but I think we have to deal with it. FDA has noted that, of course, they approved a lot of things based on the idea that the benefit of it might outweigh the risks. And it says here the Chembio antibody test was one of the first antibody tests authorized by the FDA during the COVID-19 public health emergency. Talking to a biologist friend of mine, her comment was, yeah, expect to see more. This was an early one. And what FDA has been doing is they've been following along beside Chembio and other antibody companies. And they said, we're going to look at this with you. We're going to get you on the market. You're going to start using this thing. We're going to follow it along with you. And so the status was it may be effective. And now what we're starting to see in this particular case of this very early antibody test is maybe not. They say down here, data submitted by Chembio, as well as an independent evaluation of the Chembio test at NCI, showed that this test generates a higher than expected rate of false results and higher than reflected in the authorized labeling of the device. let's talk a little bit about what that means. I'm going to show you the actual revocation letter here to Chembio. You got to feel sorry for these folks because you know, they're trying their best to get the test out there. But the test has been revoked, and it was originally issued on April 14th is when they got the emergency use authorization. FDA notes that when the criteria for issuance is no longer met or other circumstances make such revocation appropriate to protect the public health or safety, they can revoke the emergency use authorization. They say FDA has decided to revoke your EUA based on both of those grounds. So FDA is saying you no longer meet the criteria for issuance, and we don't think this is in the best interests of public health and safety. Here's what they originally thought their test could do: 77.4% positive percent agreement, which is related to sensitivity of the test. If you actually have it, how likely is it to say that you do? 87.1% positive percent agreement for IgG, 93 combined, 94.4 negative percent agreement specificity for the combination of IgM and IgG. Maybe not overwhelmingly great numbers, but nevertheless robust numbers. And what they're saying now is new information from 3 evaluations. Its performance may be both inconsistent and lower than described in your original submission. And in fact, what they're seeing down a little bit lower, a positive percent agreement of 57.1% for IgM, 78.6% for IgG, 82.1% for the combination, which they say indicates a high false negative rate. But overall, the NPA was 81.2%, which also indicates a high false positive rate. I wish we had one of our biologists on here today, but it sure sounds like you've got about a 20% chance that you're getting a false negative and a 20% chance that you're getting a false positive. That leaves the amount of time that the test is right to be maybe 60%, which of course isn't that much better than flipping a coin, 10% better. So this is really disappointing. Of course, for those who are into the biology, you're going to be interested to know what was the control. The control was positive PCR results, which of course is sort of the gold standard for these things. And down here, we won't belabor the details, but those of you who are interested in this will be interested to note that FDA does talk about what they consider to be an acceptable level for a test. Again, they're not asking for perfection. They're not asking for 100%. But they do list some of that in this document. You can find it. It's the revocation of EUAA 200-179. So that is what it is. Of course, many of you were on when Dr. Ing Pottinger talked to us about these positive predictive values and negative predictive values. And so if you want to refresh your memory on that, you can go back to her session and get your refresher college education course with respect to how those are discussed. It's also interesting to note that there is a page on the FDA website where the serology tests, of course, these are the antibody tests, are listed, and you can actually see their estimated accuracy, their estimated performance. Ones from Abbott, AutoBio, Biorad, and so forth, the Celex assay, Xoran. And so this list goes on, but Chembio is no longer on that test. Don't be surprised if more drop off, because it sounds like Chembio was one of the first ones, and now that the data is starting to come out, FDA is having to pull back. So we won't be surprised if some of these numbers drop, which doesn't do a lot for us being able to tell if people have had it. Of course, some of the news recently, anecdotally, of course, has said that we don't really know how long immunity might last to this anyways. And so, as Dr. Pottinger was pointing out to us, you take one test, you really don't know what it means. All of her experience with HIV, you really need at least 2 different tests to have really an idea as to whether you've had it or got it or not. So this the jury is still out on these things, and the science keeps pushing forward to try to find answers. So with that, that is the emergency use authorization revocation for the Chembio antibody test. We've heard lots of stories. This is just on a personal level. We've heard lots of stories of people, walking into restaurants and complaining about the mask rules or this or that. And I think if there's one thing we've learned over the course of the previous weeks, and as we press forward with learning how to deal with where we are and what does this all mean, just a basic level of human decency is really an important thing, because the numbers are not clear yet. And we're still learning what this all means. And it's at one level, it's fascinating, and another level, it's heartrending. But I think we can all agree that a basic level of human decency as we interact with each other is really, really important. So with that, I want to take just a few minutes, since we do have the time. We had promised in a prior week that we would talk about the benefit risk framework that FDA uses to be able to evaluate devices in these kind of contexts. And it turns out that back in 2016, December 27th of 2016, FDA issued this guidance called Factors to Consider Regarding Benefit Risk in Medical Device Product Availability, Compliance, and Enforcement Decisions. And this was a really forward-thinking document. And I think what you're going to find as we do this retrospective on where we've been and where we're going with these emergency use authorizations, that FDA was really following this document that they issued nearly 4 years ago. I want to take you through about half this document today. We're only going to spend maybe about 10 minutes on it, and then we'll go to Q&A. But I want to get you informed on this, because this really informs FDA's underlying philosophy. If there's one thing that we've learned during these emergency use authorizations, it's been that FDA hasn't abandoned their basic risk-benefit analysis process. And if anything, it's more alive than ever. This is how they think. This gets to the heart of how they classify products, how they clear products. And when you interact with the agency, if you don't understand that this is at the heart of how they look at public health and provision of medical technology to the public, then you're missing a gigantic part of the picture. So let's take a minute and think about benefit risk and how FDA intended for it to apply to these kinds of situations, and take a look at how it has. So if we scroll down this document, this is a guidance document available from FDA off their website. And we're going to come down to the first segment of it. And it's the scope. The framework described in this guidance may be applicable to both industry and FDA decisions. And in fact, that's exactly what we saw during these interactive emergency use authorization meetings with FDA. They were basically saying, we're going to make regulatory decisions. Industry, we'd like you to think about this from a benefit risk perspective with us in an interactive way. They do note that this would be appropriate in evaluation of device shortage situations. And in fact, that's exactly what we had with the PPE and the ventilators. And so they really did follow this as a playbook. They do note here that pre-market notifications, that is 510Ks, substantial equivalence determinations, pre-market submission review decisions, de novo classifications, pre-market approvals, that's beyond the scope of this guidance document. So they're not saying that this is how they think about those things, although if you're familiar with how FDA thinks about those things, you'll recognize that the same heart of benefit risk, weighing the benefits to the public against the risks to the public, is at the heart of how they're thinking, both about shortage situations and also about ongoing product clearance situations. So it is informative, but they do disclaim that this is really just about breaking emergency decisions. 14971. If you've talked with us ever, you've heard 14971 come up. It is the heart of risk analysis for medical devices. A lot of people get scared when they hear about risk analysis. The inventors often say, oh, my device isn't risky. Or sometimes those of us who are nerds love to get in there and just figure out all the possible risks, many of which probably aren't going to happen. And 14971 is the guidance that the medical industry, really worldwide, has for how to think about risk, how to qualify the risk, how to quantify the risk, how to mitigate the risks associated with the use of a device. Many of us, and in fact, a number of people in our company seem to enjoy higher risk sports, skydiving, flying paragliders, rock climbing, those sorts of things. If you're ever involved in a higher risk sport, you understand frequently, I hope you do, the difference in a benefit risk trade-off, risk versus reward. And this is where we are as a medical device industry. And it's actually been ensconced in regulations, in standards, this philosophy of saying, what are we getting out of this and how much do we have to risk to get that out? 14971 is the standard for that. And what they're saying here is that FDA's approach, even in these emergency situations, is harmonized with ISO 14971. They're thinking about those in the same realm. Point number one, it's patient-focused benefit risk assessment. The main point here isn't how convenient is it for the company that's trying to bring the device to market. Their focus is on the patient. And they start to lay out some of the criteria here. They say here, as with certain pre-market review decisions, if you're going for a normal clearance, when making medical device product availability, compliance, and enforcement decisions informed by benefit risk, FDA may consider relevant, reliable information relating to patient perspectives on what constitutes meaningful benefit, what constitutes risk, and what options patients are willing to accept if such information is available at the time of decision, as well as what alternatives are available. In theory, what they really want to know is, does the patient see the value in this? Is the patient willing to take extra risk, perhaps reduced oversight? We saw with the emergency use authorizations many times, FDA waived some of the normal quality systems requirements that would be there to ensure the quality of the products. Are the patients okay with that? How much do they feel that this is needed? That's, at least in theory, that's part of what FDA is looking at here. Here's an example. As the practice of medicine evolves, a clinical experience increases, or additional treatment options become available to patients, a benefit risk conclusion may change. So benefit risk will not be static at all times. It depends on the situation. And of course, with SARS-CoV-2, almost every single FDA EUA started with the justification for why it was appropriate to reduce the oversight in order to get devices into people's hands. The heart and soul of this is not static, it can change, and we're really asking, do we as a society and does the patient value what we can bring, and are we willing to take additional risks in order to bring it? Here's a couple factors to consider as we're assessing medical device benefits. So this is the benefit side, this is the value side. This is this a good idea? The types of benefits. What are the types of benefits that making an availability decision for a product would offer to us? How's it going to impact patient health, clinical management, quality of life, survival, ability to perform activities of daily living? Are we really going to give life back to people? How much can it aid in improving function, preventing loss of function, providing relief from symptoms of the disease? Of course, this argument becomes pretty easy when the basic argument is we're going to keep somebody alive, or we're going to keep them from being exposed to a virus. That makes it relatively easy to make the decision. Here's a more real-world day-to-day example. A surgical tool could be cleared for use in hernia repair surgery, and if surgeons are finding real-world evidence that it could lead to new uses, not just hernia repair surgery, well, that's a time to consider whether we could increase the availability beyond the basic labeling for the device. Maybe there's some more appropriate places to use it. That would be appropriate for this type of benefit risk consideration. Another thing to think about when you think about benefit, the magnitude of the benefit. How big is the value going to be? If it's just a tiny little value, maybe we're not willing to take any risk to gain that extra margin of benefit. But to the degree to which patients experience the treatment benefit or effectiveness of the device, the magnitude of the benefit may be assessed against standards of care and expected performance. And again, it may change over time, so this isn't necessarily static. Is it likely that the patients are going to get one benefit or multiple benefits? That factors into the decision too. How long will the benefit be seen? What's the duration of the effects? That's an important question as well. An example of that is if you're in a clinical trial, so maybe the device isn't even approved yet, but you're in a clinical trial and you've got endpoint data that takes you out to 6 months. Well, if it's going really well, maybe we should think about extending that, because we're actually saying this is a good thing and why not bring people that benefit? Once again, patient perspective on benefit. I haven't found this statement in a lot of other documents, but I'm really glad to see it here, because it really does come down to, does the patient see value in this? If they really fully understand it, do they see value in what we're offering, even if it comes at a higher risk? It's an important thing for each one of us as we're receiving healthcare. So an example is patients dying of congestive heart failure. They might highly value a medical device that extends their lives for a few months. Those few months could be very, very valuable. But a short-term benefit to someone with a chronic pain may not really put much value on it. We've seen chronic situations where, yeah, you can make a difference, say, as long as you're using the device, but the minute you take the device off, your chronic pain comes back. Well, it may have a benefit, but we're probably going to go through traditional channels of clearance, because there's really not a massive benefit from that. Coming down lower on the list, benefit factors for healthcare professionals or caregivers. Quicker, faster, easier to use. These are good things. We can consider them, but they're not the first and primary considerations. And medical necessity. If there's nothing else available, boy, that rings a bell, doesn't it? With all the emergency use authorizations. If you don't have anything, can I use this other thing? And the answer there should be yes, if it's important enough. So those are some of the things to think about when considering benefit. It's good to see that FDA considers those valid topics to be thinking about, things that should move the needle if we're asking, can we take this device and use it with people, especially in emergent or unusual situations. We'll talk really briefly here about risk. Talking about risk is a much, much bigger subject, but just to touch on a few important topics when it comes to risk. Again, harmonized with 14971. A couple concepts that you'll hear over and over again with risks. One is the severity of harm. Another one is the likelihood of the risk. And this one actually doesn't have all three of the normal things. But when you talk about the severity of the harm, it's if this thing happens, how bad could it be? But then there's the question of how likely is it to happen? Many medical devices, it could result in patient death. Is it likely to? Well, in many cases, not. And so one of the things you're trying to do is you're trying to mitigate the highest risk situations, the places where it's likely that someone could be badly injured. That's where you want to spend your time, reducing that risk. And it might be through inherent safety by design. There's just no way for the device to fail in that way. It might be through add-on safety mechanisms, or it might be through information that you provide to the users to warn them against the kinds of things that could go wrong. They also talk about distribution of non-conforming devices, duration of exposure to the population. This is very much present in the emergency use authorizations we saw. I believe you'll recall that FDA said frequently, this is good for the duration of the public health emergency. In other words, we wouldn't normally say this, but while we're having a public health emergency, this benefit risk situation flips this way. When this public health emergency is over, that's going to remove the need, and so the duration is going to end at that point. We were just talking earlier with the Chembio assay about false positive and false negative results, and of course, when those get when that gets lopsided enough, FDA is not going to feel that the benefit risk framework is still justifying the use of the device. And then finally, they come back to this again, patient tolerance of risk. Just like the patient perceived benefit, they're also interested in the patient tolerance of risk. How much risk are the patients willing to take? What do they perceive as the associated risks with the device? We want to be thinking about that as well. That's about half of this document. We'll cover more in our next session together, but I thought you might be interested to see that FDA, as far back as 2016, was thinking about how to analyze benefit risk in an emergent situation where a device could be made available, but not through the normal means. And under what circumstances would they think that was a good idea? And so it's neat to see that they had that playbook. They were largely following that playbook during the emergency use authorizations. And I think we're all better for it. The behaviors that we saw out of FDA were really exemplary in the last 3 months. So with that, I'm going to stop the screen share. Thanking you all for your attention today. And I want to open it up to a Q&A. I see potentially a question or a statement from our friend Olaf in the chat, but feel free to raise your hand if you would like to come on and ask your question live. I'm seeing some questions roll in now. Olaf, you are live with us, and after that, Ken Spencer.
Yeah, hi, Gene. How are you doing?
Good. It's good to have you on.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to go through when this refutation or this removal of the EUA for that vaccine test, and you commented about it, like the false positives, the false negatives, and so forth and I was really intrigued by Dr. Pottinger when she presented that these vaccine tests should be really not just one, but 2 tests, not even necessarily 3 tests or more, but 2 tests. And the best way to do it is to catch essentially all positives and risk having false positives in there. So people who are allegedly having had the disease, but actually turn out not to have them, because then with another test that's designed to be more strict, you can then rule out those false positives. And when you have a lot of false negatives, you don't have that chance at all. So
yes.
I think that's one of the biggest issues in that particular example that you gave and you cited here for the FDA. Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud is like, okay, as you develop something and you find out that you're creating a lot of false negatives, ideally that would give you, time to think and say and pause and wait a minute, this is not going the right way.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about how those specific technical details play out into how you work with the public health question. I was just someplace the other day, and the sort of local scuttlebutt was someone was saying, I'm pretty sure I had COVID. It was either December or February, but my spouse went out and got a test, an antibody test, and it came back negative. So we couldn't have had COVID. And I just sort of stopped and went, oh boy. And this was just the day after the Chembio test had gotten revoked. And of course, that's over and above the basic inherent false positives and false negatives. So yeah, I think there is certainly a danger in false negatives if we're going to say, oh, I'm free and clear, I can go do whatever I want, talk to whoever I want. And right. So I think that's an interesting aspect. I noticed, Olaf, you had a question there about benefit risk guideline. Do you want to ask that live with us?
Yes. So, I find this really, really helpful what you have just presented there and taken us through very quickly. And it reminds me a lot of, and this is probably derived from something like this, what's in manufacturing called the failure mode effects analysis, FMEA, or some people call it FMEA or whatever, or FEMICA, and what I then thought about is like, as a company, maybe together with the FDA, decides this is the risk-benefit assessment of this particular device, or a drug for that matter, how does that then link to what we in the public here, see on TV or on radio or whatever about like, okay, this can lower your cholesterol and this and this and this, but you could also die, from this and that and that. And that, that goes really, really fast at the end. I mean, this is like the famous, almost comical, but sarcastic kind of version of hearing about new drugs. And
no, that's exactly it. It's a very perceptive question, Olaf, and I'll try to do it justice. So you're absolutely right that things like failure mode and effect analysis often play a role in the broader topic of risk assessment. FMEAs are a tool. Fault tree analyses are a tool. There are many tools that you would recognize across industries that are perfectly valid tools to analyze risk. When it comes to how FDA views risk, they want the company to take responsibility for the risks. It's not that they want them to eliminate all risks, it's that they want them to mitigate any risks that the company deems to be unacceptable. Different companies do not have to have the same risk acceptability profile. You can choose as a company what risks you are willing to take with your product. Those need to be documented. Those need to be quantified in some way.
Wow.
And then the techniques like FMEA, like fault tree, get applied. At the end of that whole process of risk assessment, the company must make the conclusion that, wait for it, that the benefits of using the device outweigh the risks. They've got to say, yes, we sufficiently mitigated the risks of our device. As I alluded to earlier, there's 3 ways in international standard for mitigating device risk. The most preferred one is inherent safety by design. There's no way for this device to hurt you. It's designed out of it. There's just not a possibility for this particular risk to bring harm to you. But that's not always possible. So oftentimes we will put safety systems in. If I went to the car world, maybe inherent safety by design has to do with like a crumple zone in the front of your car. You might hit something, but that crumple zone is going to increase your safety. It's going to decrease your risk factor. But it can't save you in every situation, which is why we have things like airbags. I can't get enough inherent safety by design into the system. I've got to do something else to reduce that risk to an acceptable level. But what if that's not enough and there's still a risk that I as a company deem unacceptable? Well, what do I do at that point? At that point, I've got to put some labeling, some warning, some training, something to say, this has these risks. Now, I'm speaking to you from a medical device perspective. I want to make it really clear that would be under CDRH, or the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Drugs are regulated under CDER, CDER, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. So I can't necessarily comment on the exact chain of logic that happens at the end of a drug commercial that we've all seen, but you better believe that there's a good chance that it has to do with the same kinds of, at some point, you've got to warn the patient in your labeling and in your instructions about what the remaining residual risks are that they're encountering when they use your device. And so, yeah, it comes back to that sort of thing. Of course, the challenge and why people prefer inherent safety by design, and we should, is because, do you read the instruction manual? Do you really listen to all the little details at the end? We say as a society, you better still tell people, you better get it in that manual, you better get it on that advertising. But at some level, we'd really like to encourage inherent safety by design. Right. And that's one of the things where society can progress and design can progress, because we want to get safer designs out there that are still efficacious. Does that start to answer your question?
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you, Gene.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your question. I'm going to go over to Ken Spencer. And Ken, you are now live with us.
Hey, Gene. So I actually have 2 questions. One is about Dr. Pottinger first. That her presentation was the best presentation on testing that I've ever seen out there. Really,
I think a lot of us were blown away. Yes.
So my question is, even though we have a fair number of people on at the time COVID Connect on there, do you have any other contacts inside either local TV or national TV? For instance, Sanjay Gupta, who was a U of M grad. And I watch this religiously, and I've just never seen the information that Dr. Pottinger put forth on there. Is there some way to get her on there? Do you have any contacts there?
Well, let's reach out afterwards, Ken, and talk about that. I don't necessarily have those contacts, but maybe we can find somebody who does. I think you're right that in the weeks that have passed since, none of us have ever quite seen anything like it, and it rings true with everything that those of us who've bumped shoulders with the diagnostic world understand. So, yeah, I agree with that. What was your other question?
So on EUA duration and implications. So if you have an EUA and you've manufactured something under the EUA and you've delivered it out to, say, hospital systems and stuff, but suddenly the FDA says EUA authorization is over because we're calling the pandemic over.
Yep.
Can the hospital systems still use what you've delivered to them? I assume as a manufacturer, you're no longer able to deliver under the EUA, but if you've already delivered it, can the hospital system still use that?
So that's a great question. I'm not sure I have a definitive answer for you on that one. I do know that FDA concerns itself with the distribution of products. So it's a safe bet to say that when the EUA is gone, you can't distribute anymore. The anecdotes that we've heard would lead me to believe, but do homework on this one. And if we find out, we'll let you know, that the FDA may come back and say you need to pull these devices, but I'm going to make a bet, and this is just me guessing, that they're not going to go back and say, you know, all those masks that we allowed to go out there under EUA. I don't think they're going to go back and do that. That's just me thinking. That's not official, but I think the possibility is there, and we've heard the anecdote that the possibility is there for the FDA to go back and say, those devices that we authorized, you're going to have to pull those from the market.
So a follow up there. So to be moving along, you would be probably good to start your 510K submission immediately after you got your EUA authorization, I would assume.
That is absolutely correct, or while you're working on it. There's no reason to wait. And if it made sense for you to go in and work on an EUA, then if you're going to go to all that effort, you probably want to follow up pretty quickly with a 510K submission in most general cases.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate your being with us, Ken. Let's see by show of hands if we have any other questions that we can answer. Great questions today. Give it a minute here. I think that's Eric Yang in the chat there. I want to give Eric just a chance to tell people. Eric and I've talked a few times. I'm going to find Eric's. Eric, I just want to make you live with us for about 30 seconds and let you, because you've been a visitor on the show a number of times. I want to let you just tell people about what you're working on. Just unmute yourself and we'll be able to hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, there he is.
Okay. Hey, I've been working hard. I mean, trying to work with the BSI, SGS. I mean, try to get the party, who can help us with the GMP certificate. Unfortunately, right now, I have not found anyone who can help us, to move forward for the FDA Class 2 yet.
Okay, and just let people know here on this call what your where you are and what you are currently producing, because I believe you guys have a Class 1 registration for face masks. Is that right?
Yes, and also we are doing the testing for CE mark. Right now we are doing the testing in SGS Taiwan right now, so we should be able to get the testing result by July 6th. So then probably take another 1 to 2 weeks to get the CE mark.
Cool, and let our audience know where you're located too.
I'm sorry.
Just let our audience know where you're located. So you've got a Class 1 registration. You've got
yes.
You've got masks, and then you're located in.
Yeah, we got the flat masks and the folding masks. Yeah, maybe in Euro market we can call it N95, but for US market, from what I learned here, so we cannot call it N95 until we get the Class 2, approved.
Yeah, that's great. Eric, can you drop your contact information in the chat so if anyone wants to get a hold of you, they can reach you?
Yeah, cool. I will.
Awesome. I appreciate you popping in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, I appreciate all those. I'm not seeing any more hands at the moment. So unless I see anybody in the next 10 seconds, what we're going to do is thank everybody for being here on MedTech Crossroads. Another great conversation. We're just so excited about all the connections that have been made, and we'll continue doing that. We've got a great show lined up next week. Again, July 3rd, the week after, we'll be off, but then we'll be coming back on July 10th. And like I said, we're going to start some cool things with Nikki Kennedy on terms of talking to some of the doctors. Again, our whole goal here is to continue that conversation. People delivering healthcare, both in the design and development of medical devices, in the support of that industry, for the doctors and healthcare systems, for the funders, for the manufacturers. We've got such a great conversation, and we're so thankful that you are all part of that. And we can't wait to continue it next week on MedTech Crossroads. Thanks a lot, guys.